The flicker of the street LEDs rippled in soft blues across rain-varnished concrete, but Haru Gage saw the city in Morse instead of light. Every glimmer, every pulse of neon vapor, every hiss of steam escaping the under-tier vents, translated in his mind into code points, consonant blocks, syllabary shards, hints of lexicons he no longer possessed and could never fully rebuild. Words were harder now. Sentences were puzzles, assembled from pieces that refused to lock. Anyone passing by him in this drizzle spoke a private language, one so personally encrypted it might as well have been a thumbprint. He caught only ghost echoes, the cadence of a request at a food stall, the tailwind of a blessing between lovers, the fractured timbre of a lullaby hummed into a baby's ear. Enough to suggest meaning, never enough to unlock it. 14 years had passed since the Babel Fall, a prize-winning piece of benevolent code that escaped a university server farm and tumbled across the world's networks like glitter in a hurricane. Its inventor, a computational linguist named Jen Xiang, claimed her program could encrypt speech on the fly and then decrypt it with a paired key, protecting citizens from surveillance. But the code mutated faster than any team of linguists could patch. It began to stitch personal experiences, search histories, hearing patterns, childhood slangs, into its encryption parameters. The result? Language atomized. Every individual, every device, every child who learned to babble formed a dialect that could, in theory, be decrypted only by the self. You passed another human and felt them speaking in luscious, unknowable music. Security through confusion, the manifesto said. Hell by loneliness, the world replied. To stave off complete collapse, the Treaty for Communicative Continuity legalized embedded translators, a class of intermediaries licensed to derive bridges between people's idiolects. They became stars at first, roaming airports and hospitals, unlocking a universal grammar that grew in real time around their bodies like luminous scaffolding. Except the Babel code kept shifting, outpacing even them. Governments that once applauded the translators began to fear them. Any person with that facility could theoretically break the encryption of presidents, judges, generals. If a translator discovered a phrase that held stable across millions of private dialects, it could unify speech again, or become the most dangerous weapon alive. A blanket order went out. Translators must register, wear trackable implants, and never exchange raw fragments. Entire militias sprang up to enforce the edict. They called themselves tongue wardens. Everyone else called them hunters. Gage had spent a decade skirting their nets. He was a translator by temperament, not by state license. His mother, a polyglot coder before the fall, trained him to recognize rhythm, stress, mouth muscle memory, because even if vocabulary mutated, biomechanics lagged behind. People still had to breathe, swallow, pause, exclaim. Those tiny constants were footholds, and Gage climbed them. He sold his services in hush markets, ferrying love letters, medical consults, final wills. Sometimes he simply sat between estranged siblings and rewove the thread once known as hello. He got paid in fuel cells, homegrown basil, rehydrated coffee. He never gave his real name. Even Haru Gage was a scaffold he updated every season to keep pace with shifting phoneme drift. And yet tonight, he had broken his own rules, ventured above ground, where drones with Warden scarlet stripes made low passes, and accepted a contract that felt too large for one tongue. A message had arrived at his crypto box 3 days prior, written in a chimera of rune clusters and emoji mathematics so baroque he nearly declined it. But nested inside was a stable triad of phonemes that rang against his skull the way a tuning fork finds the note hidden in stone. The phrase translated, roughly, to "if you read this, You can hear me. It was the first universal seed he'd encountered in years, a shard of speech that cut through personalized ciphers like bright wire. The sender signed only as Rune Shepherd and attached coordinates to a decommissioned water treatment facility on the city's tidefront. Payment, she offered, was not money, but the rest of the sentence. A universal word. Universal words were myth, bedtime stories whispered by smugglers. The Babel code devoured commonality. Anything truly cross-dialectic should have dissolved. But rumor persisted that a skeleton vocabulary survived in subterranean labs, guarded by people who dreamed of restoring open dialogue or selling it to the highest sovereign. Owning even one such word meant power equal to the first man who named fire. For wardens, that was threat enough to justify lethal retrieval. For Gage, it was a magnet he couldn't refuse. He approached the treatment plant just after curfew, hood drawn low. Its iron gate sagged, vines choking the warning placards. The interior smelled of rust and tidal brine. He navigated catwalks over empty clarifier tanks until he reached a control room hollowed by scavengers. There he found her, a slight woman in synthesis mesh, one eye augmented with an iris-wide lens that flickered data glyphs. She studied Gage like archivists study extinct birds, curiosity tempered by dread. She lifted her right hand, palm out. On her skin pulsed a phrase in light ink, letters shifting faster than he could parse, but their rhythm, that he understood. The beat pattern said, "Do you accept equal footing?" He mirrored the gesture, tracing his own glyphs. Yes, but share context first. She nodded approval. Then, switching to vocalization because gestures left too much ambiguity, she spoke. The first syllable hit his eardrums like glass poured through velvet. His internal parsing engine wrenched into gear, seeking interlocking cognates. He fed back a murmur. Within 30 seconds, a fragile pigeon blossomed between them, half sign, half voice. Each segment demanded real-time algorithmic inference. Sweat prickled Gage's temples from the cognitive load, but they understood enough to call it conversation. Rune Shepherd told him her origin fragment. Once a doctoral scholar of semiotic virology, she now belonged to a clandestine collective, preserving anchor lexemes against extinction. They believed Babel's encryption horizon was not infinite. Beyond a certain generational threshold, drift would plateau, and humanity could converge again if given seeds. She claimed to possess one such seed tonight, yet she feared exposure. A warden's cell had traced her last distribution drop. She needed Gage to ferry the word to another city via his neural storage method, a kind of non-digital steganography that lived in memory palaces, immune to typical packet sniffers. Gage almost refused. Transporting contraband lexems across warden territory was a death lottery, but curiosity and a flicker of spite for the regime overrode caution. "Show me," he said in their cobbled argot. She produced a thin sphere of crystal polymer, no bigger than a raindrop, suspended inside a vial. Embedded within the droplet was a microstriated aurora that seemed to pulse with syllabic cadence. He recognized the encoding style, hyperphonetic microetches designed to interface with cochlear marrow. A single listen could stamp the lexeme into long-term auditory memory. Highly illegal, undeniably beautiful. He asked the implicit question, "Why me?" Her answer stunned him into near silence. "Because you already carry half of it." She flashed an audio excerpt, 3 microseconds, that matched the triad he'd decoded from her initial message. He inhaled sharply. Somehow she had mapped his personal dialect and discovered that a universal word's first fragment was native to him. "I didn't plan it," she clarified. Some languages keep secrets even from their speakers. A sudden rotor beat outside cut their dialogue. Red strobe pierced broken window panes. Wardens. Gage's gut knotted. Someone had tagged his biometrics on entry. Or hers. No time to assign blame. He snatched the vial, burying it in the mess of cables beneath his jacket collar. Rune's lens flared tactical overlays. She pulled a compact sonic nullifier from her belt and activated a bubble of hush around them. It would scramble auditory surveillance for 30 seconds at most. She pointed to a drainage pipe descending into the clarifier. Some conspiracies claimed wardens had scanners that could unweave dialects from footprints. Gage didn't know if that was true, but he trusted firearms more than myths, and several clacked against catwalk steel as armored silhouettes closed in. He flicked his wrist. A handful of phoneme-encoded nanochaff erupted, projecting a chorus of misaligned voices. The hunters faltered, sensors dazzled. Rune shoved him toward the pipe. They slid into darkness, waterless but slick with moss. Behind them, stun rounds ricocheted off rust. Somewhere a warden barked a command that his translator brain only half decoded. Eyes, word, alive. They wanted the Lexime intact, host optional. Runnels through the facility coiled like intestines. Gage's palms scraped barnacled steel. The hush bubble collapsed with a crackle. Now, every breath could be triangulated. Ahead, faint sodium glow signaled an outlet to the sea docks. Rune whispered her exit plan. A skiff pre-programmed on autopilot, hidden under Pier 9. Once offshore, they'd split. He would smuggle the word inland. She'd draw the hunters outward. Her tone suggested an old dance with mortality. They emerged onto mud flats shimmering under drone searchlights. The city skyline burned amber behind a drizzle haze. Rune sprinted, her silhouette flickering between cargo crates. Gage followed but trailed. A cramp knifed his side. He cursed the translation fatigue ransacking his muscles. Halfway down the pier, a hunter drone angled low, spotlight blasting white. Rune froze, then raised both hands as if holding the sky. Her private dialect spilled from her mouth in a ribbon of radiant sound. Even Gage, hidden behind a bollard, felt the syllables strike chords of memory he'd never strummed. The drone paused, artificial mind, hesitating at an auditory paradox. In that heartbeat, Rune spun, hurled a detonator. The drone's chassis imploded in petals of smoking alloy, but muzzle flashes erupted from shore. Kinetic darts screamed down the boardwalk. Rune pitched forward. Gage nearly broke cover, but reason screamed, "Preserve the word." She waved him off with her last breath's momentum, her lens streaming error icons. He staggered toward the skiff. Bullets skewered wooden planks around his boots. He reached the boat, tore free its magnetic moor, slapped the autopilot into gear. Electric turbines whirred like dragonflies. The skiff shot into dark water. Shore receded into blur. Only then did Gage collapse against the hull, clutching the vial beneath his collar. Somewhere behind him, wardens retrieved a body and cursed at empty seawater. He whispered an apology into Knight's mouth. Then, because grief needed tasks, he bit the vial's cap and let the droplet roll onto his tongue. It tasted of winter persimmons, of first laughter, of mistakes forgiven. The sound unfolded inside his cochlea without vibration, as if memory itself had erected a speaker. One syllable, two, then the third, the one he'd carried all his life, slid into place, and suddenly the Lexime ignited. A crown of meaning expanded, not translation, but recognition. The universal word was not a concept like love or home. It was a protocol, a handshake algorithm compressing empathy into vowel geometry. Speak it, and two encryptions aligned just long enough for comprehension. He tried it aloud. The skiff's onboard AI, running its own bespoke dialect, chirped a friendly tone and adjusted course 0.2 degrees starboard. The word had bridged him to a machine mind. His skin crawled with reverence and terror. By dawn, he reached a marina outside jurisdiction lines. He stashed the skiff, ditched soaked clothes, and melded into commuter crowds. Yet everywhere he turned, he felt the Lexamy vibrating in his larynx, begging to leap. Each passerby, sealed in their private encryption, looked heartbreakingly alone. If he spoke the word, just once, they would understand him for a flicker. But wardens tracked acoustic anomalies as avidly as they tracked heretics. The first public utterance would flare every alarm. Still, Gage couldn't unknow the shape on his tongue. He took refuge in an outzone hostel that traded beds for maintenance work. While tightening filament lines on solar shingles, he considered options. Delivering the word inland to Rune's Collective as promised was still plausible. Wardens thought him drowned, but trust demanded proof she was dead by chance, not betrayal. And if the word's power scaled to entire crowds, perhaps smuggling was cowardice. What people needed was open-source liberation. Night 3 after the docks, he found a pirate transmitter in a basement hackerspace. It had lain dormant since the days when public radio still mattered. He jury-rigged its antennas with copper filament, spliced in a neural larynx pickup, and pointed the dish at the sky. Rain drummed the roof like impatient fingertips. He rehearsed the lexeme in silence. Each attempt summoned phantom harmonics, suggestions of languages extinct and unborn. Finally, he pressed the broadcast toggle. Static crackled. Somewhere above the clouds, orbiting data relays would notice a carrier wave unsanctioned by any license. Wardens would triangulate. He would have minutes. He exhaled the universal word. It streamed through the transmitter like molten silver, encoded as amplitude, frequency, and a third property no instrument had ever named. He spoke it 3 times, each identical yet unique, like the same tree drawn in 3 seasons. Then he appended a 4th syllable, his own invention, an invitation for listeners to answer back in their dialect. Not a key, but a doorway. He cut transmission and waited. First, he felt it in the floorboards. A hum, subtle as cat purr. Then in his teeth, a buzz retaliating against enamel. Devices around the room, discarded phones, defunct drones, a coffee machine, lit spontaneously. Their speakers issued chimes, whirs, beeps, each in a different voice, yet orchestrated. Screens scrolled fragments of English, Igbo, Tagalog, Basque, code points, emoji, braille. Sentences formed across devices like migrating starlings. We hear. We match. We respond. Outside, sirens multiplied. Warden trucks barreled down alleys, dogs barking in mismatched howls. But inside the hackerspace, language proliferated at lightning speed. People gathered from adjacent rooms, drawn by the symphony of sense. They looked at Gage with wide, shimmering comprehension. For moments at a time, they understood each other without translator mediation. Tears cut tracks on faces he'd never seen before tonight. The wardens breached the front entrance with kinetic rams. Armored boots stamped corridors. Gage steadied himself. He could run, but that diminished everything. Instead, he walked to the hallway and addressed the first soldier, helmeted, rifle raised. Gage spoke the universal word once more, quietly. The soldier's rifle wavered. Through visor glass, Gage saw eyes widen in cognition. The soldier muttered back in his own encryption. Gage understood him. "What is this?" he replied. "Permission to speak, to be human." The soldier exhaled a shudder, then lowered weapon a fraction. Behind him, other wardens shouted conflicting orders, their dialects clashing into static because the universal word, paradoxically, revealed their own tyranny to them as a failure of understanding. Chaos escalated. Some wardens fired into ceilings, unsure whether to target language itself. One lunged for Gage. In reflex, he shouted the word again, layering the invitation syllable, and this time everyone within earshot gasped. The circuits of Babel hiccuped. Their personal encryptions momentarily synced like gears finding alignment. Bullets stopped mid-air, only in metaphor, but the shooters found themselves unwilling to discharge. Outside the building, more sirens gathered. Drones circled. Gage knew the phenomenon might implode any second. The Babel code would adapt, but seeds need only a fertile second. He turned to the crowd and taught them the word with gesture cues, breath counts, tongue placements. 50 people practiced in unison, laughing when they fumbled, cheering when they resonated. Their unique dialects reverberated back at them, mutually intelligible for heartbeats at a time. Enough to exchange phone numbers, escape plans, poems. Gage saw in their eyes the same spark he'd felt on the skiff, a hunger for communion that outran fear. He realized Rune hadn't died in vain. She'd passed the torch. His job now was to multiply it until tongues formed constellations again. From outside came amplified commands. Surrender. He understood them too well now. Gage lifted palms, stepped onto the threshold, and prepared to negotiate with the universal Lexim as shield and bridge. Even if they cuffed him, extracted the word, or executed him on livestream, it had already leaked, through rogue transmitters, through human nerves. 1,000 clandestine microphones around the city would replay his broadcast. Children would mouth it in schoolyards. Lovers would whisper it against collarbones. The Babel code would mutate, yes, but now faced a mutation of its own, a linguistic virus of understanding. Gage smiled as he crossed the doorway into floodlights. For the first time in years, he didn't bother parsing the future into Morse, because the future was speaking plainly, in everyone's voice at once, and it said, "Listen."